today we were going to have a very informal discussion around some of the things on paper. It's the navigating critical decision points, but I think you'll hear from our backgrounds what our experience, etc. is. We're kind of looking at the agenda. You may have heard some of the things yesterday around how to engage with industry, and then after us there's looking at how to engage, etc., with investors. So we're kind of potentially repetitive, but I think some of the messages and perspectives that we'll give will hopefully add a bit of colour to how you guys are planning on engaging, etc., with industry. So just before we start on some of the discussion points, I'll give a bit of a background. So as Jess said, I'm Lynn Murray. I work at Medimmune. Medimmune is the biologics division of AstraZeneca. There's a number of AstraZeneca folks here, so I encourage everybody to go and speak to them. My background is actually in basic research, so I have a PhD in immunology. I then spent a long time at the bench in the lab, and then decided that I wanted to move more onto the business side. So about 4 years ago, I did an MBA. I was at the time heading quite a significant research group, so it's quite an interesting dynamic, doing homework as well as barking at people in the lab. And then after the MBA, I moved into a business development role at Medimmune. So I now look at preclinical to phase 1 in licensing and out licensing for Medimmune. Sarah. Yeah.
So my name's Sarah Holland. I'm the head of Europe for external science and partnering at Sanofi. I've been doing that job for 4 months, so I'm quite new. It's a fascinating company. It's got a lot of different parts. You probably know about Sanofi Pasteur, Merial Animal Health, and multiple therapeutic areas as well. So I've been getting up the learning curve quickly. Our focus is particularly on early opportunities because we have a very rich late-stage pipeline, but we have a pretty empty early-stage pipeline. So very keen to look for early stuff. And I have teams in Germany, France, UK, Israel, and Russia. My history, I did a PhD in chemistry, but I'm afraid I left the bench probably a bit too quickly, and actually went into sales and marketing and have launched several pharmaceutical brands globally. But I did spend 9 years in BD at Roche, so Matthias is an old friend, where I hunted for oncology opportunities and did the deal for Zelboraf in melanoma. I headed up the CNS partnering team, and I also built and led the M&A assessment team for 4 years. So I've been on the kind of buy side of companies. Most recently, before Sanofi, I was leading a drug program that was at phase 2, got it to phase 3, to EMA and FDA, and it actually was approved in the US in December. So I had some sort of real-life experience of launching and developing products.
My name's Jonathan Tobin. I'm at Imperial Innovations, which is a early-stage life science investment company. We also have a tech transfer office for Imperial College, and I'm in the ventures side of it. And we're basically looking for very early-stage research-based stuff that we can help spin out into companies. And we have about 450 million pounds under management. So we're sort of for the UK, a fairly large fund. My background, probably quite similar to some of the guys here. I'm a PhD in genetics from UCL in sort of rare childhood syndromes, postdoc at Cancer Research UK. I then went into sort of academic drug discovery at MRC Technology, helping to turn sort of academic assets into therapeutic antibodies. Got an MBA from Imperial, and I joined Innovations about 5 years ago.
Yeah, my name is Matthias Essen Price. I'm the CTO of Roche Diagnostics. Most of you may know Roche mostly for our pharmaceutical or biotech part, leader in oncology, and acquired Genentech quite a while ago, and having a portfolio that really makes significant difference in terms of survival and changing patients' lives. The diagnostic side may not be known so well, but we are in fact the market leader, world market leader in vitro diagnostics, which means we are supplying both the instrumentation and the reagents into large commercial and hospital labs to run all the tests, mostly on blood-borne samples, but also with our tissue diagnostics business in pathology. My role with my team is actually to scout and assess new technologies, emerging technologies that may be foundational for our future portfolio. So our perspective is typically 10 years out. and we try to identify those technologies early. And as part of our divisional business development for diagnostics, we're part of a team that would then also prepare transactions leading to either licensing agreements or M&A. My background is physics. I did my PhD in medical physics here at UCL. And after that, I joined a company, Boehringer Mannheim, which was later acquired by Roche. So I've been in the company for quite a while, more than 20 years actually, and always on the early side of our innovation pipeline. So I was leading internal research and technology units. I was also in the early phase doing something similar what I'm doing now on a more specific topic, technology scouting for diabetes care. And right now I have a small team where we're located across the world, close to our innovation sites in the Bay Area, in Japan, in Germany, and in Switzerland, where we're contacting technologies and the related companies early, run feasibility studies, get understanding of what these technologies can offer, and then literally prepare through a relationship with these companies a possible future M&A or licensing agreement.
Great. So then I think we're quite a diverse group, so we'll have hopefully some really interesting perspectives on some of hopefully the decision points that all of you will be facing as you hopefully continue on your entrepreneurial career path. So I suppose one of the key things to really think about, the topic of this panel is navigating critical decision points. So I suppose, what are those critical decision points? You know, when do they begin? And there's a number of them as they go along. But I suppose, based on who we are, I think the key thing first of is exactly what are we looking for? So if we're approached by one of the hopefully successful one-start teams and they have an idea, you know, what sort of introduction are we expecting from them, and what are the key points that we're assessing from our perspective? Would be great to discuss.
Okay, well, I would encourage people to talk to industry relatively early, but probably not before you have IP. So I think it's not incredibly, it's not really right at the beginning, but when you've actually got something to tell, I think usually having in vitro proof of concept, having a story that hangs together. So we're always looking for the scientific rationale. You know, is there genetic linkage, or is there some sort of support for this hypothesis? I'm talking therapeutics, so obviously I'm not talking diagnostics, but therapeutics. I think, you know, at least in vitro proof of concept, some IP, and I think having building credibility is all about explaining what your plans are and then showing that you deliver on them. So don't expect a lot from those first interactions. Really see them as relationship building, but establish credibility by saying we're coming back later with, you know, the next bit of data, and then come back with it. So don't come back unless you've got something new to say, but come back with what you said you were going to have. So that really builds credibility. And you know, there's some really nice companies that I've watched, and it's really amazing when they stick to their timeline. You're like, woof, this is unusual that they've really delivered on what they promised. So that would be the guidance, I guess.
Absolutely. And Matthias, what about then from a diagnostic perspective? If we've already sort of covered some of the therapeutics, what do you look for in a diagnostic package or interactions around that particular space?
Yeah, it's a interesting and possibly more difficult question to answer than when it comes to a biotech company, right? Because really, if you look at the diagnostics business, it is actually a system business. It's always the package of an instrumentation and a reagent that work intrinsically together, and therefore it's a more complex question in terms of performance and also the maturity of a technology for readiness in terms of a product. But what we're really looking for are the underlying technology performance. So yes, we would love to see data. And we would then obviously look for what this technology offers compared to what either today is in the market or what are unmet medical needs. And really, we would match those two things where we look at what is it from a technology perspective that is on the table. Is it speed? Is it accuracy? Is it cheaper diagnostics? Or is it actually something fundamentally different that allows you to place a product in the market where a medical need is very clear and yet unfulfilled? And a good example is a recent acquisition that we have done with a company called GeneWeave, which offers a antibiotic susceptibility testing, and would allow actually to make a clinical decision that today would only be possible after at least 48 hours of incubation within 4 hours, right? And then you would have this very important information to take a therapy based on an antibiotic that you know would work, and not mess around and potentially risk the life of a patient. So that type of stuff we're looking for, and it's if you look deeply enough, it's actually rooted in the underlying technology and what kind of ability it has in interrogating the blood or tissue sample.
So that's a really interesting point to follow up a little bit more on as well. So you mentioned when you look deeper at the technology, so some of the situations that I've been in, if people do come a bit too early, you have that opportunity to almost help steer some of the future work. It's quite rare to have a full, complete package presented. Here's the opportunity, this is what it'll do, buy us, collaborate, etc. But if you can interact, I think, really early on, then, at least you're going in the right path. It may be that the data ends up not being of interest to the person you're talking to, but I think you do gain a lot of insight into exactly what industry wants. And by having that relationship, you start building trust with the other party. So expanding a little bit more then, have you got any examples of where exactly that's happened? So somebody's presented on here, we've got a new drug for glaucoma. You're like, well, actually, it might be really good for, lung injury. Have there been any that you've kind of tailored so much that you've almost switched? Or maybe because, as a startup company, you can only focus on one area, so you don't necessarily have the advantage of looking really broadly, but then you talk to an industry partner who's really experienced in looking at what is the true opportunity of whatever platform that people are working on. Have you had that sort of really early interaction that has helped shift and shape?
Yeah, I'd say so, definitely. I think quite often when we see companies early on, they can have a very naive view, particularly about oncology, and not necessarily understand the way the field is evolving, or what's a high unmet need area, and where do you need to focus, and you can make a big difference by explaining, where you're looking at. It sounds like a big market, but actually, there really isn't the opportunity to differentiate there. You need to focus, and knowing your competitive landscape is crucial. And lots of times we hear that there's no competition, and that's a real kind of killer for a conversation, because
especially
that just means,
if it's the company you're talking to has a competitor molecule.
Yeah, that can happen.
Yeah.
Obviously, we wouldn't sign a CDA then.
Yeah.
You should always know your competition and think broadly about your competition, because they can be much different to just your immediate mode of action. So you need to understand the therapeutic landscape and what's coming, and then industry can help, because usually we're thinking 5-10 years ahead, and so we've already thought, well, that niche is filled by this thing in whatever phase, and we can say, no, that need is probably going to be met, but look a bit further and you'll see there's a really high unmet need here. So yes, and those relationships often take at least 18 months to mature, so there's a long conversation.
I think the other thing that people can use sort of the benefit of interactions with VC investors is that we sort of see a lot of different companies and meet a lot of different people, different stakeholders, and so even if the outcome of an interaction with an investor is that they don't or can't invest in your thing, a lot of the time we will put you in touch with people that can help, because it's sort of no skin off our noses, and if we can help, then we will. So it's worth sort of trying to use investors to help you beyond just writing checks as well.
Yeah, I can give you an example of how we actually, and when I say we, it's my team and I, love to work with small companies in preparation of a future relationship. And that is actually, in a collaborative way, design feasibility studies and get some data created for questions that we would have in terms of using that technology. And without disclosing any details, there was a couple of years ago a company approaching us with a really cool technology that could actually be introduced into the central lab, where high throughput and cheap reagents and all this kind of efficiency plays a role. And we looked at that, and it just didn't offer any advantages in these dimensions. And what else they could offer, we felt doesn't give us a differentiation in the market. So that would have been a straight no, thanks very much, not for us. But we actually discussed with that company other applications for other diagnostic needs, where we actually would either have a portfolio gap or see something where this technology would have an advantage. And we actually engaged in feasibility studies, financed that with a small amount, and in the meantime have some joint IP in that field and a growing relationship. So that's kind of give and take, right? And for us, it's fun because we can explore something that we could never explore on the inside, and we serve the company here in need to help them both directing the technology into a corner where it would really have a differentiation and provide some non-dilutive funding at that point. Yeah.
That's great, yeah. So I suppose that sort of then links, if you see the opportunity and you're sort of critiquing the data or exactly what that content is, how important do you think the content of the presentation is compared to the actual individual? So you know, sometimes maybe the pitch isn't great because it's not necessarily what the recipient's looking for, but then how much should people really stress on how they interact with industry?
Well, I think the data is still really important. Ultimately, that's what convinces us. And data, there was a question about, does data trump experience? And I think, yes, it does. Yeah. You can get advice, but you can't get data unless you need data. But yes, I think we've talked about, you know, being honest, knowing your competition, being credible, making promises that you then live up to. These things are all incredibly important to build trust. You know, but entrepreneurs we've worked with can be quite difficult, and you still do the deal because the data's fantastic. So ultimately it's a fantastic bit of science that is what decides.
I think also presentations to, you know, investors, although you're presenting obviously a lot of science, it's different from giving an academic seminar or a presentation just of your data, because investors are interested in the person that's got the idea and is presenting. So it's quite important to present your personality as well as your ideas and data. And I think especially in sort of less experienced entrepreneurs, they kind of forget that it's important to establish the kind of human rapport as well. And so it is worth spending maybe a bit more time talking about yourself and your background and your motivations and intentions and so on, before just kind of diving headlong into the science.
And just to add to that, yes, it is about the presentation, and it's about you clearly explaining to us what your technology can offer, what your differentiation is of what your product is going to bring to the market. But for us, in addition to that, it's also about the interaction that follows, right? So in many cases, technologies that we see are way too early for us to invest, right? So we typically love those, as a company, those transactions where a system product development is a year or two before market introduction. That's a pretty good point right now for us. It might change, but right now for us, that's the point where we like to take ownership of these companies and technologies. And you see that in transactions that we've done last year, both on the sequencing technology side and with transactions that I mentioned, like GeneWeave or Constitution Medical. So companies that have done a significant amount of engineering have shown some proof of concept, even feasibility, a prototype is on the table, and we would take that into manufacturing and into a product launch. Right? So, and obviously, when we look at early opportunities, we would love to understand early and then build a relationship. Yeah.
I think, absolutely, I think from an industry perspective, we understand how expensive generating a lot of the preclinical or pre-launched, if it's thinking of diagnostic data, is. So as long as there's a robust story behind that, then we can understand that potentially we can collaborate at an early stage, whether it's using certain capabilities that we have in-house at AstraZeneca that you may not have in your academic lab. And I think that sort of, along with building the trust in the individual, you start looking at the trust in the data and the asset and the potential. And I think it's no lie that, and there's been some recent publications, that a lot of the data in the literature is unrepeatable. So, we don't want to be that company that can't repeat what's already out there. So there is that sort of balance of risk sharing. So we will look potentially to do collaborations with a view to then in licensing. So really starting early, and then, the benefits from you guys, if we end up passing on the opportunity, we may have generated some great data that you can then use for partnering discussions with somebody else that may have more interest in potentially that disease area that we had, that made a strategic decision to pass.
Maybe another point to make is presentation isn't the only way to interact with industry. I think you can really do a lot through scientific conferences. So go and present posters. Go and look at the posters from the industry partners you'd like to work with. Make friends with the scientists, because those people will be your internal champions in the future. Establishing a strong rapport with the actual scientists in the pharma company can be really powerful. So don't pursue just one avenue. Talk to the corporate venture funds, talk to the BD people, but also try and connect to the scientists.
Yeah, and that's a really great point, because I think one of the things you can do, and we do this a lot more now, is if people come to us with opportunities, we'll have a number of conversations before they'll come in and present to a broader team, just to help tailor that presentation. Because, when we bring people together to review opportunities, it's actually it may seem simple, but it can be quite a big ask to have a lot of senior executives around the table. So we obviously want to make sure that it's as productive a discussion as possible, so everybody benefits. If we say, actually, we're not interested in that, focus more on this, have you thought about this? Have that discussion, and then you can at least walk into the meeting with the industry folks a little bit more confident, knowing the things that you're going to get thrown at during the presentation. So how important then do you think, whenever, from an industry perspective, we talked about the opportunity and the data, but what about those next steps? How important do you think it is for teams or opportunities that are pitching to industry or to investors, that they've thought through exactly what do they want to get out of that interaction, and what are they thinking at for the sort of runway of their particular, whether it's financing, budget, or career path, or whatever? How important is that sort of forward-thinking view, Jonathan?
I think in the first instance, we're quite informal with the sort of first few interactions, and especially for entrepreneurs who are just starting out and have ideas, we don't necessarily expect that they've thought through every detail. It's more that there's sort of something fundamentally interesting in the project, and we can perhaps help them with that process. I think it's certainly important that the person has such a good sort of mastery of their domain and the competition, and has a sort of encyclopedic knowledge of their area, because that just shows you that this person is a real expert in their subject matter. So I think it doesn't, you almost don't want that to be homework. You want that to be sort of intrinsic knowledge, so that the person that you're dealing with knows a lot more than you about the subject.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Sarah, do you find that their forward-thinking plan helps, or do you sometimes, because I know from my personal experience, if that's always the last slide in the presentation, and these meetings always overrun, so that's quite often overlooked as to the forward plan just based on time of the meeting. But I do sometimes think it is important to discuss up front. So why are you here? Are you here just to give a scientific seminar on your opportunity, or is there something that you think you could benefit from that presentation or that company or that individual at a conference? Or
Yeah, I think you need to be realistic about what you're going to get out of a meeting at an early stage, and if your objective is really to establish credibility, then presenting, as I said before, what you're going to do next and then coming back with it is probably one of the best ways to build credibility. I think big companies can be very frustrating animals to work with, and you can establish a really good impression, fantastic rapport, and then all those people have gone a year later. So just accept that that's life in big pharma, and you have to talk to a lot of, I think we said last year, a lot of frogs to find a prince. You need to be talking to a lot of people, and some of those people will pop up in another company in the future. So just accept it. It's frustrating and infuriating, but I tell you, being on the other side is equally frustrating, because we're trying to build long-term strategies in a constant environment of change. So it's not easy on our side either, but just don't expect too much, and accept that it takes, I think the average deal is about 18 months to 2 years cooking. So be prepared for that, and start early, but come with real data and fulfill your promises.
absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely essential that you know where you want to go, and that you are so crystal clear on what is the differentiation of your product and your technology. And I believe that it's really a critical decision point when you take the decision to talk to a potential partner, as it is critical to when you the decision point when you get in your funding, right? So you can only be clear about this point when you know your long term and know exactly why you want to partner at that point in time with what partner. And that helps us then to understand literally where you want to go. And we may actually conclude from that, no, that's not compatible with what we want to do, but it's actually this essential ingredient then to have a discussion instead of having a discussion where we have no idea where you want to go, and let's figure that out together. We typically don't have the time to do this. Yeah.